Hey, welcome everyone. This is a collaboration that Alex and I were putting on from the Taro side. We've known Alan for a very long time, who is the founder and CEO of Kadima, which has helped many people in their careers with passing interviews. And so today is an event which is talking about what do people frequently miss about big tech interviews. And we have someone here, Eric, who's actually been doing a lot of these interviews at Amazon. I'll just give a quick background. The genesis of this talk came from a course that Alan put on Taro. And so I left a link for that. We got a lot of great feedback about, hey, this is the first time I've actually understood what the other side, the hiring manager or the interviewer, what do they think about? And so then from that, we said, hey, let's actually make this more interactive. Would love to get people involved. And that's where we put on this 1 hour long chat. And so, Alan, I'll give it over to you, and then I'll let you figure out, should I like interrupt you as people are coming in with questions, or do you want to hold
Yeah.
that until the end?
If you have questions, raise your hand. You are the host. You have host power, so you do what you want, Rahul. Feel free to interrupt, and we'll have on the next slide also we will leave time open for Q&A. So do put those questions in the Q&A portion of the Zoom bar, not in the chat, because I won't be looking at the chat. So welcome everybody. And like Rahul said, I'm a big fan of what Taro does and what Alex and Rahul built there, because there's a lot of career advice out there that's just a bunch of BS. And that stuff drives me mad. So we're going to be talking to you about what actually works and get to great jobs here. So I'm joined here today by the man that we've been calling in some of our PR Mr. X. And the reason why we call him Mr. X is because he has a day job where like he'll actually fill you in as much as Mr. X wants to share. But we'll introduce Mr. X, or actually he put his name on the Zoom this time already. So Eric, that could or couldn't, or that may or may not be his real name, but it is. So we'll talk a little bit about how to get into FANG companies from an interview perspective. We'll talk a little bit about our background and our perspectives and why we can talk a little bit from insight on this. And we'll talk about how you can go from being played at part of these interviews to being like a player there and really controlling your destiny. So let me go to the next slide here. Housekeeping items. We are going to share the replay. We're not going to share the slides. We'll share the replay out, but you can feel free to take screenshots if you want. And at the end, we're going to try to leave about 30 minutes or so, depending on the time of Q&A, but we'll see how much time we got there. So do leave your questions in the Q&A, and then at the end, upvote them and we'll choose the ones. And also, if you have any live questions, maybe we can take those too, but we'll see. A little bit about who I am. So I am now on my 30th company. This is the first one I founded, Kadima Careers. But before that, I worked for 22 other companies. I had 29 jobs. I've worked for 38 bosses. So I've been around the block a little bit. I'm really good at getting jobs. I'm good at holding the jobs, although 5 of them, they asked me to leave. Very nice, not that nicely. But 25, I did leave on my own volition. I happen to be really good at interviewing to get jobs. And also I've interviewed tons of people during my career, including about 400 people while at Google, including the number 2 interviewer in 2015. I was only beaten out by the physical security team that interviewed more. And before I started Kadima Careers in 2020, I performed a lot of real life research to understand how you get into companies, what are different, what's unique about different interview processes. And the truth of the matter is, it's not all that different across many companies. And the biggest difference are really with Amazon and Google. There are some other companies that have some idiosyncrasies, but the 2 hardest ones are really Amazon and Google. And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot here tonight. And we'll talk about the other ones too. But if you can figure out Amazon and Google, you can get into any company for the most part. We're also not going to be talking about the technical interviews here. Rahul, Alex, the Taro community is a lot more technical than Eric and I combined. We're going to be talking about how to get hired at these companies, how the decisions are made, and how you can influence it to your advantage. A little bit about my background. Here are some of the companies I worked at. I'm not showing my money on here to brag or to, like, there's people here that have earned a lot more than me also, but just to demonstrate that if you take proactive charge of your career, you can really like earn the money that you're worth, and grow your career and compensation. And actually, Eric, we should have moved the slide. I have one more slide before I introduce you. Actually, let me introduce you now because this is awkward because I'm not introducing you. Let me get to that slide and I'll move back here because it's too long in here. So I introduced myself. I want to introduce Mr. X, Eric. So Eric, if you can share a little bit about yourself before I go back to those other slides.
Yeah, definitely. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Hudson. I am a director of talent acquisition. I'll go ahead and say it. I work at DocuSign currently. I've been in the tech industry now for over 15 years. I worked at Amazon for 8 years. I was an Amazon bar raiser where I interviewed thousands of people, and that also includes coaching. I've coached, I've placed, I've really helped people negotiate 6 and 7 figure salaries. I've even interviewed Alan Stein here on the call. Alan and I have done a course together, and we'll talk more about that later. Alan actually interviewed and got a job at Amazon as an L7, which is not easy to do. And we have an entire course where I go into all of the interviews that he had and give the insights of what a bar raiser is like. I've also been a part of Kadima, working with Kadima and Alan now for 3 years. I was his key coach starting out, and it's been really cool to be able to see the individuals who come into Kadima who were really just trying to find their way and trying to find that inflection point of that next step and that next point of their career. And Alan has been able to help thousands of people, and I'm very happy to be here today talking more about Amazon and tech. And to Alan's point, if you can get a job with Google or with Amazon, you can get a job anywhere. And that's really the rigorous program that I put people through when I help them coach them and hope they land that next position. But looking forward to talking more about this today and going through the presentation. I'll hand it back to you.
Cool. Let me go back to a couple other slides and going a little out of order here. But what I'm showing here is my background with Amazon. So as Eric said, he and I have become friends. I found him on LinkedIn because I reached out to him because he had such ridiculous positive feedback about his knowledge about the Amazon interview process. I reached out to him to recruit him to Kadima to be one of our coaches. But while I was speaking to him also, like it happened to occur that Amazon reached out to me to interview me for a job that I had submitted a long time ago before I started Kadima. So what you see here on the screen are the 22 jobs that I've applied for at Amazon. 21 of these are archived. One of them is still actually active. This is a role that they actually made the offer to me on back in 2022, and this is still in the portal. So as we talk about if you have questions about interviewing, don't believe everything that you see on the websites and the portals. They're not accurate. But what is accurate here is I did I applied 21 times for Amazon. I got to the loops about 3 or 4 times, and I finally got an offer. And we'll show you shortly here some of the footage of me interviewing at Amazon and Eric giving me some feedback on it. But Eric, from your perspective as a former Amazon recruiter, this is always a question that people have of what happens if I apply too much to a job, or what happens if I got rejected before? Can you dispel or share some information about how recruiters look at people that have applied multiple times, I've interviewed multiple times, and yet I still got the offer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say first and foremost, try to not spam the applications. There was actually several times where we would look at candidates that had applied to thousands of Amazon applications before, and their profile was shared because it was like, wow, look at this person, how many times they've applied. Also, most likely when a recruiter sees that you've applied that many times, they know that you probably interviewed, and there's interview feedback somewhere that could be negative, right? So I actually recommend don't use volume when applying to jobs for Amazon because people can see that you've applied to those jobs. Another thing too is if you get rejected at the application, don't worry about it. Keep moving, right? And when I say keep moving, I'm saying don't apply to thousands of jobs. I'm saying be thoughtful and methodical about what you apply for. Make sure that your resume aligns. Don't apply to jobs that you're not a fit for. And it's surprising how many people do that. Once you go through a phone screen and you get rejected, you're fine. Don't think about that feedback as being bad. You can keep going. What you need to be concerned about is when you get to the loop stage of the Amazon interview and then you bomb. Because if you bomb, no one's going to want to touch your profile for at least 6 months, right? That's an Amazon no recycle. So for at least 6 months, you're not going to be able to really get another interview because they're going to look at your feedback and it's going to be bad. Now, if you felt like you were good, it could have gone either way. You're probably a recycle, which means you can interview again. But again, if that's the case, then people are probably gonna look at your feedback. So there's probably a cooling off period. So I'd wait at least a month if you're considered a recyclable candidate. And I would ask the recruiter, am I recyclable? Can I interview again? And they will tell you if yes. If no, they probably won't tell you. So if they're not telling you, that's probably not a good sign. So that's an idea of applying and how you should follow a structured approach when applying to Amazon.
Yeah, and you, as a candidate, you sometimes get that feedback as well. So even though I got rejected from a few before I got the offer, the rejections were all positive in the sense that I actually got some feedback and I was not told to don't apply again. I was always told to apply again, but you got to be wary of how people reject you and always ask for feedback. You're often not going to get it, but you can always ask for it. So the other thing that folk like, and actually, I don't know if we have the emojis up here, but if you can put in the chat or with emoji, there's like around 125, 130 people here. How many people have actually interviewed at Amazon before, either successfully or unsuccessfully? I see you have your thumbs up, so I see a bunch of thumbs up there. So people have interviewed through there, but lots of people have not. And if you have not, it's a unique experience that goes through a process very strong on structured interviewing and very strong on measuring people based on rubrics around LPs or leadership principles. Eric, you want to share a little bit about the LPs or the leadership principles that Amazon looks at and which ones actually matter and which ones are kind of a bunch of BS?
Yeah, definitely. So when you go through the Amazon interview loop, you're going to have 5 interviewers, 2 leadership principles each, irrespective of level, right? So with that in mind, you're going to have 10 leadership principles that's going to be assessed. If you're technical, it'll be 9 because you'll have a tech screen and then 9 other leadership principles. One person will be designated your tech screen and they'll have one LP. Most of the time, it's dive deep, right? So it depends on what level you are, what LPs you're going to get. The 2 new ones, strive to be the Earth's best employer and success and scale bring broad responsibility, are not going to be on your interview. Those are what they call the PR LPs. Everybody knows it. It's even a joke inside Amazon. You're not going to get frugality unless you're a finance interview, and you're not going to get hire and develop the best if you're not going to be a manager. That eliminates 5 leadership principles right there. So there's 11 to focus on if you're interviewing as an IC. Another great thing about Amazon as a company is once you get to the loop, they don't really look at your resume anymore. All they're looking at is what comes out of your mouth and the examples that you give, and do those demonstrate and do those raise the bar for the leadership principles that have been assigned, right? Now, we have access to Amazon's entire interview database. So when they ask these questions, they have a drop down menu of questions that they ask. And this is consistent. It's been consistent for 25 years. And yes, there it is, right? So when they interview you for customer obsession, there's a drop down menu of questions that they choose from. Typically, I choose the top 4 because it is a drop down menu. Amazonians are busy. They usually come into the meeting on 2 wheels, and they usually select the drop down menu and they select the first one that they see. Bar raisers are a bit more selective because they get tired of asking the same questions over and over again. Trust me, I've done 1,000 interviews. I would get into an interview and I would just be like, I'm choosing a different one. But majority of interviewers that are not the bar raiser typically go to the top 4 questions. So you can see these here, what they look at. The most important part here is your star interviewing. And I can go into a very long monologue about how to do a star interview, but essentially what you're trying to do in a very simplified way of explaining it is demonstrate how you deliver customer obsession. You can see the concerns, you can see the strengths. You want to show the strengths and you want to stay away from the concerns, right? If I'm a bar raiser, the bar raiser's job is risk mitigation. It's not a hiring process to a bar raiser, it's risk mitigation. So if I see any of these concerns, that's going to be a risk I'm going to call out, and I'm going to want to address that risk before I look at any of your strengths. So that's what I would focus on, the Amazon leadership principles. But you can use some of these questions, and Alan, I'm sure we can provide this database to anybody that asks for it.
Cool. And now, so this database exists there. I'm sure a lot of tarot folks have this. Amazon is very unique with their standard operating procedures and the interview process. We'll talk a little bit about Google shortly. Google's a little bit more, not willy-nilly, but like more open-ended in terms of what questions a interviewer can ask. There's so many different interview databases at Google, and then I'll share with you some Facebook questions shortly as well. But so Eric and I can sit here and talk about giving like the proper interview answers, like the STAR method that Eric was talking about. But like really to improve upon this, it's helpful to see it. So what I'm going to show you now is a quick video of me answering a tough question from Amazon. This is real footage that I secretly recorded, like my whole interview loop with them. It's about a 6-minute clip where you'll see how I answered this question under pressure. And to be fair, this is intentionally not a perfect answer. And Eric's going to give me some feedback, and be harsh, Eric. And I have thick skin, and I already turned down the offer, so I don't care anymore. But let me play this for folks. And like you'll hear a crappy AI voice. This is just so that we can mask the interviewer, but it wasn't really AI. It was a real person interviewing me.
Tell me about a time when you were not exactly clear on what your manager or leadership wanted from you. Since they offered guidance that required one or more interpretations, what did you do?
Recently at Salesforce, I was under these two conflicting demands of leadership of delight our customers, delight our employees. And I think you can do both, but our leadership wanted people to be engaged and retained on the team. They were very focused on retention, and we were dealing with a lot of attrition at the time, partly because it was during COVID and there's great resignation, a lot of stuff going on there, partly because I was getting a lot of pressure from above that you need to drive resolution times down, and that not just me, like the whole organization, but like I was responsible for it, and we need to improve CSAT. So there were these competing demands on me to drive these metrics that theoretically could require a lot more time and effort from people. And then we're hearing a lot of feedback from our employees that they're being worked too hard, and with COVID and all the challenges, like there were tough challenges for me. I don't know if you dealt with it, but a lot of people on my team were dealing with either suffering from COVID, their family with COVID. It was tough times. So I had these conflicting demands on me. The leadership was actually much more concerned, honestly, about the CSAT and the time to resolve. And they would almost, at least the leader that I had, was more talk about the care about the employees. So it was very hard for me to manage those two things when trying to communicate that to people across the team and the organization that, yeah, Salesforce does care about its employees, but our employee metrics that we tracked on our team, our broader team, not my specific team, but the 500-person team that I worked with, were actually pretty poor. It was like in the bottom 25th percentile of the organization, of all the Salesforce. So it was really hard to manage those two different demands. The way I tried to do it, and I was semi-successful. I was very successful at driving the CSAT and very successful at driving the time to resolve down. I was not as successful about keeping employees engaged. I lost one of my strongest performers during that time because she got very frustrated by the dual power struggles between get your customer issue answered quickly, no matter what the case, and take care of yourself, no matter what the case. So she was like, I can't balance both of these. And she wound up moving internally to another team. But I tried to communicate clearly. I tried to align the team on the key metrics that we're focused on. And our attrition was about company average, which I actually saw as valuable because we actually worked in part of the org that had higher attrition rate than normal. We're dealing with upset customers all the time, customer issues. It's a stressful, depressing sort of role for some people. But we wound up having attrition in line with Salesforce attrition. I think it was like around 10 or 15% annualized, which was higher than usual. But we saw a spike during COVID. So the way I best tried to deal with it is communicate open and transparently, take feedback in from the different stakeholders, but make sure that people are focused on, hey, here's our CSAT, here's our time to resolve cases, here's our employee engagement score. The employee engagement score was not as effective of a metric because was only taken every 6 months. Whereas our
Uh-huh.
CSAT and time to resolve, I had on a minute by minute basis. I saw that all the time. So I tried to manage both of those. I tried to give people time off where they needed to, and I tried to do that. But yeah, that was a difficult situation where there were mixed messages from above, and I had to execute it. And I was also dealing with stuff on my side, like personally myself, that I was trying to deal with and while run this team and keep people engaged in the role.
Were there any programs that you put into place? How did you manage the gap in performance results and demands?
For the CSAT and the time to resolve, that we had real time. For the employee engagement, we did not have real time. So the way that I addressed that is we tried to have some virtual happy hours. It was okay. We shipped some chocolates to people's houses and we tried to do like a chocolate tasting with wine. It was okay. It didn't really replace a lot that people were relaxed, a lot of rules about, hey, you need some mental time off, take it off. I didn't track it as closely as I used to because I saw how people were struggling, and there might have been some people that were abusing it, but I don't think most people were abusing it. I think most people were just dealing with all of a sudden everything is shut down in the world. So I tried to be as human as possible, which I try to be. I don't always come across that way, but like I'm a very strong operator. I operate on logic, but I do focus on people as well. And I know that if you get engaged, happy people, they will produce good results. They will delight your customers as well. So I would also talk it over with my wife a lot, get a second opinion. She's a doctor and she probably skews more towards the self protection than the operational rigor. So I think she was a good foil for me as I talked about some of these things. And I sought some advice from other leaders and found out what they were doing on their teams. And there was nothing that was great except to be empathetic and communicative. I also did actually launch a survey that was sent out on a monthly basis, just like a quick pulse check, asking a few questions about what should I stop doing, or what should this team stop doing, what should this team start doing, what should this team continue doing. Very open-ended, just to get their feedback. And then I acted on it, because if I didn't act on it, then it would go into a black hole and they would have less credibility for the organization. I got some anecdotal feedback that was well received by people. And again, our attrition level was not worse than the rest of the company, which typically our attrition was worse than the rest of the companies.
Okay. So what we just watched was me answering a question from Amazon, and this was intentionally not one that I nailed. This is one that has areas for development. I see some people in the chat raising things there. This ultimately resulted in me getting the job offer from Amazon, but it was not a perfect one. And now, Eric, I'm curious, what do you think of how I answered the question? What did I do well here? What did I do not so well with? And what should the people joining us here take away from this for their own future interviewing skills?
Sure. So starting off, as a good bar raiser would do, I look at the risks of what this candidate has and what would I be concerned with. And immediately what jumps off the page is, in my feedback, I would look at, first of all, content and delivery are two pillars of great start interviewing. In delivery here, Alan had a lot, it was very long-winded, very verbose. There were some areas in his communication as he was talking that it came across as very unorganized, and it seemed very much stream of consciousness, which you have to be weary about. So that's the first thing. Another thing too is on the follow-up question that they asked Alan, he was able to give them the results, but he didn't give them that in the initial story. So if I'm looking at this example, and if I'm doing some coaching or if I'm a bar raiser, I'm a bit concerned because I'm wondering, okay, is this going to be somebody that you're going to have to pull the answer out of when they're communicating in front of the VP, right? I would have some really deep concerns there. And there was a lot of what I call Microsoft Word when Alan needed to get to Microsoft PowerPoint, right? So exposition is a dangerous thing if you ramble too much in an interview. You want to be focused on really highlighted strategic examples that you've practiced many times, and that can prevent you from having to go into a rambling mode, right? Some other things too. So he did a really good job of painting what I call painting the dark picture, right? So any good example has how bad things were, and you're the knob that turns it and makes it great, right? So he actually did a really good job. He was talking about the bottom 25%. He was talking about the CSAT score, right? But he didn't follow that up with what the big result was until they asked the follow-up question, which is dangerous. You want to have that selling point, that impact, that result in the initial story, right? Another thing too is that what I didn't like is he talked about losing a top performer. It really wasn't pertinent to the story at all. And you have to be careful about interviewing because you can give negative ammo, and that negative ammo will they'll take that and they'll not hire you, right? That was negative ammo. So you probably shouldn't even said that. I would have eliminated that from the story. However, let's talk about some of the good things that he said, right? A couple things. One last bad thing is he talked about the people from above, right? This is an L7 interview. He needs to talk about who those executives were and how he was influencing them and moving them forward, right? So any L7, I would say you have to be able to talk about, was it a VP? Was it a director? Was there contention? Was there pushback? How did you get them to buy into this new great idea that he had? What was positive about what he had is he created a lot of innovation, what I like to call structure in the gray. Amazon is very ambiguous. I always like to say Amazon is put together with duct tape, right? Amazon and a lot of Elon Musk companies are very similar in how they operate, where you have to navigate the ambiguity by being able to create that structure. He was able to do that with his approach and his solution, which he was able to brought forward. Another thing too, that if you listen, and if you're a good Amazon interviewer or a good bar raiser, you'll listen, you'll be able to hear and people demonstrating the leadership principles in their story. So I can hear dive deep, I can hear invent and simplify. He demonstrated both of those things. He talked about keeping employees engaged. So all those things were really good. And ultimately, he did give a result, a good result. So while it wasn't the best example, he ultimately did show problem solving. He did use metrics, he used data to be able to drive his point home, even albeit it did take some follow-up questions to get there. And I ultimately think that I would lean to inclined on this, but there's probably a lot of people who would probably be not inclined because they would be concerned with Alan's ability to give all the details immediately in the immediate story. And did he come across as unorganized? And for some people, they may not like that. But there are positives here that address those, which when I'm thinking about an Amazonian, I want somebody that can be scrappy, that can get in the gray, that can create structure in the gray, they can still be able to deliver results, create impact, and ultimately put together a good product, even though they're in a situation where there's a lot of chickens with their heads cut off and you're having to wrangle them. I would give Alan the benefit of the doubt, and I would lean to inclined on this answer. So that's my verdict.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And we intentionally use the footage that we'll share. I think you might have some access of it in Tarot, is out like multiple hours of interviews. And this is one question out of 7. Like I had about 7 questions per interviewer, and I had about 4 or 5 interviewers. So this is one that we wanted to pick to show you what imperfect is and some of the areas where to really get inside the head of an Amazon bar raiser. Like Eric, because like the debrief sessions of these interviews, talk about the debrief session of like how you lead those, how long they are, some of the contention that exists from this body of work. This is just one question here, but it's usually 5 different people. Or talk about what the debrief is like and how intense that is.
So at Amazon, there's a 30-minute debrief that follows every single salaried loop or exempt level employee, right? So this is a 30-minute call, but there has to be a hiring decision made after the 30 minutes. First 5 minutes of that call is everyone reading everyone's feedback. So you have to have the feedback in before the debrief starts. If you don't, the bar raiser usually they're not happy about it. So you have to get that feedback in. First 5 minutes, bar raiser leads the call. Bar raiser facilitates your debrief, not the hiring manager, not the recruiter, the bar raiser, right? So then everybody reads the feedback. The bar raiser then is going to make their points and summarize what they see. You also will have a heat map tied to you based on how you did against the leadership principles in the tech assignment. So it's going to be yellow, green, or red, and it'll be right there in front of everybody. So everybody can see it. So immediately everybody gets a visual of you as a candidate, right? Which is either going to be good, bad, or somewhere in between. So the bar raiser's first job is to mitigate risk. So I'll dive into what are the risks that are associated with Alan based on the entire body of work across the 5 interviewers and across my interview as well. And then we'll start there. And then basically what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll analyze each one. We'll go round robin. If we talk about something that is bad, somebody may chime in who was inclined and say, I heard the opposite, right? Amazon, again, is a contentious culture. So there will be a healthy debate about that candidate. Some people actually take it as competition of if they're inclined, they try and talk that person to be inclined. If they're not inclined, they try and talk the person to be not inclined. So the debrief is very contentious, and it could also be driven by your writing sample as well. So your writing sample, if you're L7 above, some L6 roles, that can also be a determining factor. Towards the last 5 minutes of the call, the bar raiser is trained to be able to drive to a hiring decision. So, for example, if I interviewed Alan and I was not inclined, and I saw feedback that made me think that he's not the candidate that I want to hire, right? But I don't see an extreme risk there, right? So a question I might ask the hiring managers, I might say, look, Alan, or look, hiring manager, I'm not inclined on this candidate. And we have seen concerns here, but there are strengths. And I do think that the strengths could address the risks. So with that in mind, even though I'm not inclined, I'm not going to block this hire, but I'm going to remind you that if you hire this individual, this could be somebody who could knock down walls for you, or this could be somebody who's weighing you down and you're having to figure things out and potentially have to manage this person out if they're not a fit. Is this a candidate that you're willing to fight for? Is this a candidate that you would be inclined to hire? And so my job as a bar raiser is I just want somebody to talk me into it, right? Just talk me into it. Can you give me a reason to be inclined? I have a bar raiser is the only person that can block a hiring manager from making a hiring decision at Amazon. And I have done that. I have had several occurrences where I had to tell the hiring manager, I do not support hiring the person, and I'm going to block the hire. So that's a little bit about the hiring decision. And then you do one last round robin before you come to these questions and you say, okay, what's everybody's final vote? Put the final vote in, heat map change, and then you make a final hiring decision.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Eric. Appreciate that. And Amazon is unique in the sense that they have the bar raiser that's the ultimate decision maker. What I'll share here briefly, we'll go through this a little quicker, is Google's interview process. They typically have a hiring committee. And the way that they evaluate questions or candidates based on the level, so it really depends on the level and the bar that they're essentially setting or calibrating you on. They're looking for these 4 areas. With the area that I always interviewed on was GCA, general cognitive ability. If people have a question, I can talk to you about my favorite questions to ask for that. Leadership, they would assess, and that's more important as you move up within the organization, but it's important for everybody to show initiative and step up. You really have to do that. Google expects that. Role-related knowledge, and this is where the technical probing goes, or case studies, or like scenario-based questions, where they will dig deep on your RRK, your role-related knowledge. And then Googliness, I hate. It's unclear to me what Googliness is. But it's this fit. Do you fit with Google's culture? I would always pick someone in particular on the team that I liked. I respected her humility. I respected her judge of character, and I let her do Googliness. And she was always a good barometer for me. Here's a little into, so we talked about like Google and Amazon. Every other company is essentially pretty poor. I shouldn't say all. Coinbase has mirrored Amazon's process. Stripe mirrors a lot of Google's process. OpenAI takes a lot of things from both of those processes. But this was my meta interview feedback. And if you look at the exact questions that were asked, these are the same sort of behavioral based questions. Tell me about something like, let's say, how familiar are you with designing manual and system controls and workflow processes? So that is, they want to understand my experience with there. There are some, explain a situation where you had to work with an XFN, and that's terminology in Meta for cross-functional network, and manage conflicting views. How did you tackle the situation efficiently, and what was the outcome? These are all similar to how we train with Amazon interviews, are behavioral-based interview questions where you answer with the STAR technique. This is a situation, here's a task, here's the actions that I took. And especially with Amazon, you want to use a lot more I's than we's, especially higher you go up. And then the R are the result. And then Eric, I know you talk a lot about the L after like the STAR. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important to have with interviews at Amazon or really any top company? You're on mute.
Yep, notice that. I actually call it the double L, L squared, whatever you want to call it. But the L is learn. What did you learn from it? That's the most common follow-up question that Amazon typically asks is, okay, great. What did you learn from this? Whether that's a failure, whether that's a success, right? Because they're actually trying to see, did you learn something from this and did you apply it in the future? Amazon is a very continuous improvement, innovation culture. So they want to see what that innovation looks like. Another thing is if you had to go back and do this again, how would you do it differently? That's also a very common question that is asked because they want to see, have you thought about this? What would you do differently? How would you add some complexity and innovation to something? Just what is your mindset like? As for the other L, long term, what is the long term impact of this? So a lot of times I always preach customer impact and business impact, but there's also long term impact. So if you can do star LL, you're setting yourself up for a really good example.
Nice. Thanks, Eric. So now, like the image you have here is a picture of me at Meta during my onboarding when I was a noob. And I was out there with a bunch of leaders. They took me out there and 200 or 400 other people. They brought Carol Dweck in, who wrote the book Mindset. And she talked about the power of growth mindset. And what we're teaching you here are things that you can learn, things that you can improve upon and learn how to crack the code for these interviews. These interviews are hard, but they're not beatable, but they are beatable. And the question is what strategy are you using to make sure that you're ready to do these things? And so we'll talk a little bit about how we help you do that. But if you are hell-bent for working at a FANG company, a big tech company, you really need to prepare for these interviews, which come upon you very rarely. And once you get that opportunity, there's a lot you can do within your power that can help you convert an interview to an offer. So we just shared tonight some serious insider knowledge on how to crush these FANG interviews, and we talked a lot about Amazon and Google. But here's the truth. There's a huge difference between knowing how to ace one of these interviews and actually being ready to do so. Signing up for this course here with us and the Tarot team puts you light years ahead of most people who want to work at these companies. And yes, we'll be sending out a replay, like people have asked that in the chat, so you can rewatch it and take notes. But I'm going to be candid with you. If you had a FANG interview tomorrow, if you had one of these interviews, you probably wouldn't be 100% ready. And like we talked about today, the FANG interviews are not school exams. You don't pass by memorizing answers. You pass by delivering them fluidly and confidently with life-changing opportunity on the line here. And it takes more than knowledge, which you've gained today. It takes reps and practice, not with your spouse, not with your best friend, not with your brother-in-law. I'm talking about live practice with the interviewing master, someone that's done it so many times, it doesn't faze him anymore. And he barely has to think about it. It's muscle memory. And he doesn't mind tearing me a new one when he's given me feedback. And guess what? If you want to be trained and supported in doing this at the highest level, I got something special for you tonight and the Tarot team. Eric and I are running a FANG interview training for a small number of people that includes a one-on-one mock interview. And we're calling this the Taste Academia experience. And I'm going to tell you everything that's in here. First, you're going to get a 30-minute mock interview with Eric, you and him together on Zoom. And if you want to do this, like I'll give you the link in a second. Eric has a day job too. So grab those sessions if you want prime spot. And that means you can practice your interviewing skills in a low-risk setting with someone who will call out every mistake. You heard what he said to me. He won't shy away. He'll give you every opportunity to improve with specific feedback on what needs to work before you interview in a real-life situation. Then you're going to come to a group interview practice with Eric and I, so you can take what Eric gave you to work on and get further practice and feedback with both of us on a Zoom call. And you're also going to get something that you can't find anywhere else in the world. It's a special look over my shoulder video of that entire interview loop I went through at Amazon that led to my successful $425,333 job offer. And that's the exact dollar amount that Amazon conveyed to me before negotiation. That was my exact offer with the RSUs. I did not negotiate because I knew I wasn't going to take it, but we do recommend that you do negotiate. And in the video series, you're not going to just see the interviews that I went through to get this Amazon offer. You're also going to see Eric's director cut commentary on what I did well, what I did poorly, and the hidden dynamics at play that you may not pick up on with your naked eye, but a bar raiser will. This footage isn't publicly available. Like, I'm sharing it with the tarot community. There's some aspects on tarot, but for the whole thing, most people don't even know that this exists. And I'm not sure if I'm even allowed to share it, but screw it. I want you to know what works and what actually happens behind closed doors. Not just in theory, not just what some career coach learned 30 years ago, but what actually works right now at some of the most selective companies in the world. And with all of my Eric's and my commentary and lessons that you can take away for your future interviews. I can easily charge $500 for these Amazon interview videos alone. And in fact, normally the investment in the Taste Academia is normally $250. But since you took action to attend this masterclass and you're part of Tarot, we're going to make this even more of a no-brainer for you. If you want to join Eric and me in the Taste Academia and become truly ready to succeed, click on the link on the screen or the QR code. There might be a link in the chat. And again, Eric has a day job. He has a daughter, a young daughter, and he's working for Academia. So if you want to get on his schedule, sign up now, get on his calendar. And the bottom line is, if you're someone who knows that you have the skills, knows that you can do the job, and all that's holding you back is interviewing, this is an opportunity to totally change your life. There's not a better step that you can take right here. And this entire Taste Academia package is waiting for you. So there's a link on the screen, and also that $50 coupon. If you type in partner 50, you're going to save another $50. So it goes from $249 to $199. Grab that, grab time in Eric's calendar, please. And now we're going to take some Q&A. But before we go into the Q&A, as you end this call, there will be a pop-up on here to give us feedback. Please let Eric and I know what worked, what we can do better, and I appreciate that. I'm going to go into the Q&A now, unless Eric, you had something to say first?
Yeah, I was gonna say, look, last time we made this offer to everyone, we had the highest level of demand that we've ever had, and it ended up really booking out my schedule, which includes through next week. So I do have limited availability, but I do want to be able to work with you and prioritize all of you as well. Another thing too, I'll say is don't search a job alone. One thing academia that I've seen is many people moving on to their next great opportunity. And you're probably going through this. I've seen it many times where you don't know what's going on. You're getting rejected for jobs. You're not sure what the next one is. What am I doing wrong? We can fine tune that, and we can take that and we can help you and allow you to join the community that we have with Kadima. So you're not searching alone. You are getting that fair feedback that you need, and then help you be able to land those multiple offers from people that you see on Blind all the time. You can be that person because we help people do it all the time. I'm really excited to work with all of you. And again, my availability is limited. Prefer that you book now versus later, because I'm going to be not as available next week just due to how busy I am. But this week we could prioritize. But Alan, I'll let you run it with Q&A.
Yeah, no, awesome. And what we built here at Kadima, we are arguably the world's greatest career accelerator. So we bring people in like Eric to help train our people and get people great jobs. But with that, now I'm going to go to the Q&A. I'm going to go to the one with the most upvotes first, and we'll dig into here for at least 20 minutes or so, at least 20, 30 minutes. We'll see how many good questions we got here. So if you say your name, I'll mention it. If not, I'll just say anonymous. Anonymous attendee. Under what circumstance would you qualify for an up level? How difficult is it to go up a level in an interview process, Eric?
It is extremely hard. So out of the thousands of interviews I did at Amazon, I can put on one hand how many up levels I saw. So that's why I always recommend, if someone tells you, well, this is a lower level role, oh, you can always be up leveled. Recruiters always say that. It's not really a feasible thing. So you have to be at the right place, the right time, the right people interviewing you for it to happen. You're basically hoping for a perfect situation. Try to go after the highest level position that you can, because at the minimum, you want an opportunity at that job. If you get down leveled, so be it, but you're not going to be up leveled. Again, it can happen. I have seen it happen, but it's just so rare. Like 5 times out of 1,000, very small chance.
Yeah, and that's Raul, were you going to say something on that?
Actually, just a quick follow-up. Yeah, that's great advice. But actually, there's a question on the Taro forum literally today about the job market's tough right now, and this person like took a career break and is coming back in. Does it make sense to deliberately try and down level just so you have a better chance at passing the interview? Or what's your typical advice about?
No, I would say go after the level that you are aligned to. Career break, whatever, what years of experience do you have? I have coached two people in the last 6 months, both who interviewed at L6 for Amazon, but they were way overqualified for the job and they didn't get the job. And then they came back to me and said, hey, I have an L7 interview, and they got the L7 interviews. Sometimes you're trying to put a square peg into a round hole. And another thing too is if you are someone who has L7 experience and you get down leveled in an L6 job, you start to look around and you realize the people that you're with, you're probably either more experienced than or you're better than, and then you're bitter. And I've seen that happen at Amazon too. When I was the recruiter for a job and I had several people who I down leveled and talked me into coming to the job because that was my job, was to talk them into coming. And then they were just miserable. My advice is align your experience to the job that you're most qualified for. Don't take a step back just because the market's bad.
Cool.
Yeah. And one thing that we recommend at Kadima is first focus on the company, then focus on the years of experience, and focus on that, and the compensation will come. So there's a question here for for new grads, SDE1 roles. There's two different questions here. One, I think I know the answer to this, Eric, but you let me know. What LPs to focus on for a new grad role, grad SDE1 role at Amazon? And my hunch is a recruiter will let you know. But are there specific ones that are more prevalent for new grads and SDE ones?
Yeah, it's typically like the ones I was talking about, the 11. I would remove hire and develop the best. I would remove frugality. I would remove the two new leadership principles. And then I might take out think big or write a lot because those are more like leadership position questions.
Yeah, and I would ask the recruiter, although I have asked the recruiter before and they do mislead you, not intentionally, but I don't think intentionally, but I have been misled by recruiters.
If your loop has not been scheduled, they don't know. So when your loop has been scheduled, that's when the LPs have been solidified. So wait until your loop is scheduled, then ask.
Cool. Then there's a question here, 3 rounds of interviews at SD1. How would I know which one's a bar raiser? So I have my experience from a candidate's perspective, but Eric, how would you say if and when that is revealed?
Sometimes it's almost impossible to tell, but there are some telltale signs. First and foremost, if the job position has nothing to do with what you are. So if you are interviewing for a L5 software engineer 2 position, then and somebody from sales is interviewing you, that's most likely going to be your bar raiser because the bar raiser is a third party that can come by and give an unbiased opinion. There are some times when they use a bar raiser that's also an SCE2 or a senior software development manager, and it's really hard to tell. Another thing you can look at, and this is a blessing about Amazon, is if you're interviewing for, let's say, S3 and AWS as an SDE2, and you're being interviewed by an SDE that's in Amazon fulfillment technology on the operations side. That's a dead giveaway. That's most likely your bar raiser. Another thing too is if there's two people on a call, one's shadowing and one's leading, the one that's leading it is the bar raiser in training, and the one that's shadowing it is typically the bar raiser because that person who's leading it is in the bar raiser and training program. So those are usually the signs if you want to be able to find them. It doesn't mean it is the bar raiser, but those can give you some clues.
Yeah. And I think the unique thing about Amazon and Google, and I think it's the only companies I've been at, and I've been at 22 that have done this, is they actually have side-by-sides for interview training. Whereas I've been at other companies and I'm at day one in at Tableau and they're like, go interview people. There was no training. They're like, go hire people for your team. And at Google, I had to go through some preparation and be like calibrated effectively. And Amazon, I know they do that too before they send you into the wolves as an interviewer. How do you see the SWE interview loops changing with the increased use of AI tools that enable cheating? Will we move away from the lead code style questions?
The answer is right now, everyone is actively trying to figure out how to overcome the interview coder founder's solution. Columbia student, by the way, Alan.
Yeah, I know. He got kicked out.
And he got kicked out for that. Yeah. People are acting like right now, I have a task force at DocuSign trying to figure out how we can prevent this from happening. Right now, the best way to prevent it is to move away from questions that are like leak code and ask them to explain it verbally versus a screen share, something like that. And then ask questions that allow them to be able to go into it from a verbal perspective versus doing that. Another thing that's been brought up is bringing back in-person interviews. So there's a lot of old school, yeah. Sometimes the problem is going back to being a caveman. That's some of the things that we have currently in the works, but you can bet if this continues, which why wouldn't it continue? It's making things easier for the candidates to get jobs. There's going to be some solutions put in place, and that this is probably going to be a fleeting moment in time where you can get away with doing this. So do it now, because I will go ahead and tell you that we're working on things right now in the TA industry to be able to prevent this and get ahead of this. Because I have hiring managers smashing me in the ground saying, how are you going to prevent this? So I've had to come up with some solutions to do it. And most likely what's going to happen is someone else is going to come up with some kind of else AI solution to get ahead of this too. More to come on that, but it's a hot topic, and you better believe TA leaders around the world are talking about it.
Yep. Cool. So here's a question. What are some questions to ask the interviewer at the end of the interview to genuinely learn more about the teamwork and culture? I'll give my perspective, then love yours, Eric. I don't think you're going to find, you don't really want to probe all that much about the team and the work culture during the interview process. You want to probe about that before you join the company, and you can probe about that as you're doing informationals ahead of time. It's really just a softball. If you ask the person about how the team is or what the culture is there, you should be able to find that out from other means. Once you get the offer, then that's something to probe on. Instead, my favorite question to ask the interviewer at the end is, compared to the other candidates that you're considering, where do you see my strengths and what concerns you potentially have that I could address? That gets a lot of good insight out. But Eric, any thoughts on learning more about the team and the work and the culture during the interview? And if you have any other suggestion for good question to ask at the end of an interview?
Yeah, no, I like that question, Alan, by the way. That's a good question. One question I love to ask is, especially if they've been there for a long time, and this gets the interviewer talking and makes them think, because the goal is you want to make them think. You want to ask questions that get their mind moving. My favorite one to ask is, say someone's been at Amazon for 5 years or Google for 5 years. Based on how have your expectations of the company changed from when you joined the company to how you view the company today? And that gives them an opening. They'll be like, okay. And then they'll talk about their time with the company and their evolution of the company, where the company's at today. It's a great question. It gets them going. Another thing too, I like to do is I like to ask them, I like to have them visualize you in the job. So I'll say, you and I, okay, so say I get this job and you and I, 12 to 18 months, are talking about how things have gone. What are some of the successes that you see or pain points that you want to see being solved in this role in that conversation, right? Or what will we talk about that will make it a successful 12 to 18 months? And that's just to give, first of all, make you understand that you're interested in being successful. There's a guy actually who's a EA executive that gave me that one, and I always liked it. And then there's other ones too. There's performance metrics. What are performance metrics like? If you want to go ahead and ask that. What are first day expectations? And back to Alan's point, what does the best candidate look like versus an average candidate? I want to be the best. What does that look like to you? So that's some of the ones that I usually ask.
Cool. Someone mentions here they worked at Amazon before. It was in focus for 2 weeks and then laid off as part of a mass layoff going on early 2023, unrelated to focus. Then he or she applied to another role and was told that he or she was ineligible for rehire by the Amazon HR. This person's question is, how long am I ineligible for rehire, or should I just move past working at Amazon again? I'll give my outsider perspective. I was like, put very low odds of you working there again. And there's lots of other fish out there in the sea. I've been blackballed by some companies that I didn't find out about except because I had inside friends that told me. But Eric, what would be your advice here?
Yes, unfortunately, there's a tool. It's called the eligibility for rehire tool that recruiters use. And if you are marked as not eligible for rehire, I've actually had this problem with people in the past where a person was completely fine and they were trying to reach a manager was trying to reach their non-regrettable attrition goal, and they marked the person as not eligible for rehire going out the door. But everybody loved the person. They had good performance reviews, and they were trying to come back, and we were all shocked, including their old director, that they were marked ineligible for rehire. And it was an act of Congress for me to be able to get them to remove the not eligible for rehire. And it was literally an act of Congress. It took me like a month to get this person on board when it shouldn't have. The person was just messed with by the manager. But I'll go ahead and tell you, if you were on focus and let go and you're ineligible for rehire, it's going to be really hard for you to come back.
Yeah.
And so I hate to say a hard truth, but your chances are very low unless you can get someone inside the company to advocate for you as a hiring manager. That's the only way.
Yeah. And yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of other fish out in the sea, and there's a lot of good fish out there too. So we're running a little low on time, and Rahul left us. So we have no one left from Taro. We can just take over the whole Taro, but no, but let's enter a couple of more questions here. And one question that someone asked in the chat, which I'll share, is what was what was my go-to GCA question at Google, my general cognitive ability question? And this would be my favorite question that I would just dig deep in. I was like, hey, say this was when Larry Page was CEO, but now it's Sundar. Say that Sundar is thinking about charging $5 per month for Gmail, the consumer version, not the corporate version. What do you think of that idea? And then I would let them talk. Then I would ask them to size the market of how big of an opportunity do you think this is for Google? And then I would just want them to think through that. Then I would ask them, what are the pros and cons of doing this? And then just hear that. And then I'd ask, what would need to happen in order to move forward with this? And what is your ultimate recommendation to Larry? I said Larry at the time, but Sundar. So there's no right or wrong answer, but it was really just thinking about how people would dig into that and think through that. And I see Eric busy thinking here. We don't have enough time, but I would love Eric's answer on that, but maybe over beers one time.
Few beers.
Cool. Okay, so let me get one more question here from the ones that have been most upvoted. And then let me just do a couple of housekeeping things. One, we are going to send a replay out. So I think some people join late, so we are going to send a replay out. Two, we do have this Taste Academia. Let me just share on the screen again here for folks that either joined late or didn't scan it, or you get access to a one-on-one coaching session with Eric. You get, I think you can see my screen here, right? You get the group coaching session with me and Eric. You get access to our digital course where you will see the entire Amazon interview process and get Eric's feedback on that. So you get all of that. It's normally, if you add up the price, it's $896. We're giving it away for $199. Use the code partner50 to save that $50. With that being said, let me answer one more question, and then I'll have a couple more last minute things. Okay, this is a good one. And Eric, I've heard some things, and I know we have some clients here, but would love your perspective too, of how are FANG adjacent companies with their interview processes? Are they similar to FANG, i.e. like examples, OpenAI, Microsoft, Airbnb, Square? I'll tell you for sure on, Eric, you go first in terms of like your knowledge of this. I know you coach lots of clients as well. Yeah, how would you compare or contrast those companies?
It definitely depends. There are some companies that do have their culture, like questions that you have to go through and answer, but there's a lot of them that are still very unstructured. But if you follow the STAR interview format, if you prepare, this is why I always prepare people like they're going to go interview at Google or Amazon, because if you prepare like you're about to go through an Amazon loop, about to get beat up in that loop, because if there's probably a lot of people on here who's gone through it, it's not easy, right? And if you do it all in one day, you're going to need to go to sleep. You're going to need to take a nap. I did mine in 2 days and it was a lot better, but I also did one all in one day and I was worn out, right? So I highly recommend just putting yourself into, you're going to interview one of those two companies and then preparing for it, right? But you also got to remember that a lot of these companies are not as systematic or formulatic as those companies too, right? I'll tell you my current company, DocuSign, like we're just getting to the point where we're having repetitive standardized loops. People were having like 14 interviews, P4, and then having 3 interviews for a P4, and they both got an offer. How fair is that? But now I actually introduced this, a standardized process that they can follow at DocuSign. So it really just depends on the company. I would see if there's any culture things out there. There's a lot of interviews, use blind, use levels.fyi, use a coach who can help guide you, because you never know. There's a lot of things out there. Like Snowflake is going to be different from DocuSign, right? Databricks also has a very high bar, very difficult to get a job there. They also pay very well. They're going to be different from Google. So do your research beforehand, and yeah, and just prepare like you're going to be doing a bunch of behavior interviews.
And we've had clients that have interviewed at all those companies, and none of them are, at least in our experience, have been as structured or as consistent. So it's a little willy-nilly. So if you over prepare and you're tight with your answers and you expect all these questions and you build up your interview, what we call our interview vault, like our story vault of at least 20 stories to use, you're going to be prepared and you can break it down, and it's a very beatable process. So anyway, my wife's going to kill me because I'm up here late here in New York. You guys are all on the West Coast. A lot of you, Eric's in the Central Time Zone. I'm in the East Coast, so it's 10 after 9. I'm old. But I do want to thank you all for joining tonight. Big fan of the tarot, guys. Big fan of what you guys are doing with tarot. Do reach out to me and Eric on LinkedIn. I'll put actually my LinkedIn name in the chat if you guys can't find me online, but you can find me there. And do sign up for the Taste Academia. You're going to get access to Eric. Eric normally charges $350 to $500 for his coaching. So you're getting like really reduced access costs for him. You're going to get access to this group coaching session. You're going to get access to our digital course, and we're going to get you in good shape for your opportunities. So thank you so much for joining. Eric, before I hand it to you, Eric, but as a reminder, as you log off here, there will be a survey. Please give us feedback. Feedback is a gift. And before I leave my last 3 words, Eric, anything else that you would like to share?
Just don't search alone, and look forward to talking to you if you decide to do a Taste Academia.
Cool. And my last 3 words, own your career.